Hi guys, so in this series I'm going to talk about the process of getting a horse off the racetrack and just kind of my process in letdown time and what I do with them when I'm first getting them started into a new career. The horse that this series will be starting is a 3-year-old 15 one-hand thoroughbred gelding who only had a few starts on the track. He had like 8 or 9 starts and won one race. Not a super successful racing career, it just wasn't his thing. He retired sound, and myself and one of the exercise riders that works alongside me both decided to buy him. So he has 2 moms, and this is just kind of the process in getting a horse going straight off of the racetrack. So Percy is a horse that both Janae and I used to gallop, and he's from my work at the racetrack. So we picked him up a few days after his last race and brought him to my client's house for letdown time. At work at the racing barn, he went out in a little paddock turnout and then would be stalled in the evening. So it wasn't that much of an adjustment for him to come and go into a situation where he has free access to a barn and then a large pasture and out with another horse. In the off seasons, Percy was used to going out with other horses and being out in the field. So he adjusted quite well. He was a little fresh coming off the trailer into his new place. And ran around a little bit for the first 2 days, but all in all, he settled in quite well, and coming off the track as a horse that had no stall vices or other stereotypic behaviors, it was a lot easier of an adjustment for him. For horses who are chronic cribbers or weavers, they typically amp up the frequency of the behavior while they adjust into a new place, which is why I think it is so important to ensure that they have free access to turnout while they're letting down, because it gives them a means of letting any stress or anxiety out by means of moving, and then they're not just trapped in a small stall or a little paddock. So I think that having access to a field is super important. So the first thing to consider when getting racehorses is that they are fit for an entirely different job than the vast majority of riders are doing. A lot of people see race fit horses and assume that they're skinny even when they have healthy, shiny coats, full hindquarters, and fat coverage over the ribs. Most people see ribs being visible in any capacity and assume it means skinny. When that is not the case, you should be looking at their hindquarters and seeing how full they are, looking at the shininess of their coat, and seeing the overall health that way. So in these initial clips when Percy came off the track, he has a tucked up waist because he is race fit, and he has less fat coverage than a lot of riding horses do, because racehorses need to be able to dissipate heat effectively, and fat traps heat, so they don't have as much fat coverage as horses in different sports do, because they have different energy output needs and they need a means of dissipating heat quickly so that they don't overheat while they're running. So the tucked up waist is a normal thing for really fit horses. You'll notice it in event horses too, and you'll also notice more ribbiness in event horses. So this is Percy when he's race fit, and you'll notice his body start to change over the course of this series, even though there's not a whole lot of time between his arrival and the end of this video, but you'll see how quickly their bodies start to change and adjust once they're taken out of their training programs and put into a new lifestyle. So that's just an important thing to acknowledge when looking at racehorses. Most of them are not considered skinny. They're just race fit and have a leaner body type and leaner muscle mass than what we're used to seeing in horses that we use for riding, because we tend to keep our horses on the chunkier side as sport horses anyways. So the reason why letdown period is so important, and why I think that no one should get a horse off the track if they don't have ample access to turnout and a means to give them some time off, is that these horses are fed a really high grain lifestyle, and while they're at the track they have limited turnout and they just have a very high energy job. So I think that having a break from training and being able to be a horse and get used to a new diet without having to worry about work is very important for them. So immediately when I get horses off the track, I reduce their grain quite a bit, and I give them free choice access to hay. So the hay that Percy has access to is a mix of alfalfa and timothy, and we just give them as much as they can eat. This helps with the transition to less grain and allows them to keep weight on, and also helps with ulcers if they have any. But since Percy came from my boss, I know that she does preventatively treat ulcers with omeprazole, so he's less likely than most sport horses to have ulcers. But Race horses and all sorts of sport horses and show horses have a higher instance of ulcers due to their higher grain and higher stress lifestyles. So it's important to consider treating for ulcers if you aren't sure that the horse has been preventatively treated already. And this is also why free choice hay and access to forage is so important, and why we should make sure that our horses are eating a lot more hay than they are grain. So he has free choice access to hay, and then he also has access to grass in his field. And then for grain, he gets a very small amount of a high-fat grain mixed with some beet pulp, and he's on Equine Bodybuilder, which is a rice bran supplement, and it really has helped pack on weight and keep his weight on. But typically speaking, when I'm getting horses that I don't know well off the racetrack, I'll keep them on more grain than I would like to and gradually start weaning them off. But since I know Percy and I was comfortable with the feed program we were going to put him in, he started off with less grain than I would typically do with horses that I don't know as well. I also give my horses vitamin supplements because they don't typically get all the vitamins and minerals that they need in their diet just from grain. It's also important to realize that dietary needs will change seasonally depending on how extreme your weather is, as well as depending on the horse's exercise output and what sort of training program they are in. Since Percy is having a letdown time, he's not doing anything other than hanging out in the field, which has low energy output for most horses, because while they do play and run occasionally, they're definitely not training themselves to the extent that they would be at the racetrack or in a show horse program. So he doesn't need as much grain now, but as he starts to go into more training, we will give him a little bit more grain, but I still don't really give my horses high grain diets because they get a lot of their needs from the free choice access to hay, which is honestly the most important part of their diet. No matter how grain you shovel at a horse, if the quality and amount of hay is not there, you won't see as much of a difference as you will in horses who get enough quality hay. It makes such a big difference. They are grazing animals, they are foraging animals, they need that access to hay, and that access needs to be basically constant because they are trickle feeders. This is why sport horses are more prone to ulcers, because we feed them more high grain diets and do not allow them this free choice access to forage, which is what they really need. Grain is an unnatural additive to their diet, and while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, we need to remember that these, at the end of the day, are foragers who need free choice access to forage. I want to add that free choice hay has been proven to reduce stall vices and reduce stress behaviors in horses because it gives them something to do and keeps them busy. So it is a very important part of a diet. And even for horses who do not need as much hay as what Percy is eating right now, there are ways that you can limit the hay intake while still letting them have free choice access to hay, like with slow feed nets or other slow feed hay options. So it's just something to consider because it will reduce their instance of ulcers by buffering their stomach and keeping their stomach full throughout the day. And it also keeps them busy, which helps keep them warmer during the winter and happy and doing something other than cribbing or weaving or exhibiting other weird stall vices. So full disclosure, since I get all of my horses from my boss for the most part or from other trainers I know, I don't vet check my horses when I get them off the track typically. George was an exception because there is something that we were looking in further into for him, and obviously with him he ended up having some pretty severe issues. But generally speaking, most of the horses retiring from the track don't have severe injuries like that, and Percy hasn't ran much, he hasn't had any soundness issues on the track, and he has very clean legs. But this is also why a letdown period is important to me, because if you aren't going to vet them, if there is anything lingering or any soft tissue injuries or any aggravated muscles, giving them this time off makes it less likely that they're going to have a problem and re-injure themselves, especially since they're going to be starting a completely different career that they are not fit for and aren't currently well muscled for. So for Percy, we gave him about a month off before putting him into any form of work, and then once we get to the point of this video where we are riding him, I'll tell you a bit about what we are doing with him and how long that will last. But the letdown period for young horses for me is longer than I would give an older horse typically, so he had a full month off from his last race and then would start back into an easier program. Also, I pull their racing plates and leave them barefoot during the letdown time to let their feet adjust, and hopefully a lot of them can stay barefoot for some time before starting into a training program that may require shoes. In Percy's case, before he arrived at this barn, he pulled a shoe, which left a nail hole that an abscess got into. So for part of this video, you'll notice that he looks a little tender on his feet, and he has a little vet rep booty on one of the feet because he had an abscess, and we were putting sugar dye in, which is iodine and sugar mixed together, to draw out the abscess infection inside his hoof. Abscesses are highly painful, and horses will be very, very lame on them, to the point where you could even think that they broke a leg or something. But typically speaking, they aren't a serious veterinary issue and are very easy to resolve. So after we drew out the abscess, he was completely fine. I understand that for most people, buying horses, a pre-purchase exam is a must, and it's never a bad idea to do one, but my recommendation is that if you are going to do a pre-purchase on a horse, always do x-rays. Don't buy a horse just off of flexions, because as someone who has sat through numerous vet checks with thoroughbreds off of the racetrack and show horses as well, I haven't seen any correlation between horses who will flex sound and actually not have any issues going on inside them, as well as horses who flex off but may be completely clean if you x-ray them. So flexions aren't really a viable means of judging long-term soundness, because George flexed sound with slab fractures, Milo flexed sound with his tendon injury, and I've seen numerous horses with issues under the surface flex sound, whereas I've also had horses that flex unsound but are x-rayed and x-ray completely clear. So if you're going to do a vet check, I would highly recommend x-raying any joints you're concerned about after flexions, just to make sure that there's nothing else going on, and don't rely on flexions as a means of guaranteeing you're buying a sound horse. And at the end of the day, most horses in vet checks will have something come up that's technically abnormal or an issue on an x-ray. It's just a matter of if you can deal with it in the discipline you're going to put them in and what you're willing to deal with. But most horses aren't going to have perfectly clean x-rays if they've been used in any capacity, and even field horses that are out in the field generally have something there if you look hard enough. So that's something to consider. So after about a month off in the field with limited groundwork and absolutely no riding, we decided to give Percy his first ride back after his abscess blew. So for his first ride, basically all I wanted to do was just go walking around and have a very nice, quiet, easy ride so that he realizes his job is going to be less high energy than it was. So what we did is I rode my client's horse, Bill, who is pretty quiet and really used to hacking out at the back of the property that they're on. And then Janae rode Percy, so we went out in a pair and just had a nice, quiet walk around in the wilderness and checked out things like puddles, walked past the cows on the property, which Percy was afraid of at first, but then he walked by them really bravely. So during this whole hacking period, he was a little up and excited, but he walked really nicely, which is perfect because a lot of the ones we get off the track like to jig their entire first ride out. But in this case, it was easier because we didn't have to trailer him anywhere to go hacking. So our really only goal in doing the hack was just to have him walking quietly and check out some new things that he hadn't seen before, and just kind of get used to life as a riding horse, walking around on a loose rein and with a friend and checking out the forest and doing horse things. The track that we would train him on at my boss's place has coyotes and stuff, and it is kind of near some trees, so we would see deer and stuff occasionally, so this wasn't as huge of an adjustment for him. And for people who are newer to thoroughbreds, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going out in such an open place, because if they do decide to bolt, if you're not comfortable galloping them and how to stop them that way, it could be a little scary. But as I said before, both Janae and I galloped this horse, and we galloped thoroughbreds for work, so it's just something that we're pretty used to doing since we just get on the racehorses after they've had a whole winter off. So a month off is nothing. And anyways, if they have access to turnout, I generally just expect my horses to be able to deal with time off quietly and be well behaved when coming back to work, because they can get their yahoos out in the field. And this again is why turnout is so important, because it allows horses to be easier when dealing with time off and not so crazy coming back because they have a means of exercising themselves in the field. Hacking is also a really great way to start these horses back because it gets them out walking on hills and walking forward, which loosens their muscles and starts building up their hind end and preparing them for the work we are going to ask them in the arena, since they're not typically used to doing lots of circling and whatnot. So this is a really good baseline to get them out and kind of get their brains more sensible, get them used to seeing things and walking and dealing with their nerves and excitement in a productive manner, while allowing them to build necessary muscle for riding. So for Percy, we just are going to hack him in the backfield for the first many rides through the winter before we ever start him back in an arena. And I think that this will help his brain quiet down because he has a little bit of a busy brain. And if we were to start him immediately back into a focused program that asked a lot of him and was a little bit more boring with less to look at than he gets outside when he's hacking, I think he would be a lot more likely to end up hot and fried, which is the mistake a lot of people make with their thoroughbreds. And even when I get young guys like this, I pretty commonly get comments about how quiet and sweet my horses are and that I'm so lucky that I keep picking horses like that. But I just want to reiterate the fact that it's not me just lucking out with picking quiet horses. It's their entire turnout situation and how we deal with them and how we show them to scary things in a quiet manner and just kind of expect quiet behavior in turn. The other nice thing about hacking, if you can find somewhere with forgiving enough footing, is that it can start to build up their sole and make it so that their feet hold up stronger to different types of footing, and just kind of make their feet a little harder since they've had shoes on all the time while they're training at the racetrack. So for Percy, walking along the crusher where there's some rocks was really good for him. He wasn't footsore at all in these, but it's going to be good walking back and forth across this since it'll help strengthen his soles. The other thing you'll notice in this video is that he's a little spooky to the branches and the sounds of the puddles and whatnot, which is why we walked him back and forth through so many puddles, because he wasn't really used to going through water. So we kind of just walked him back and forth until he was comfortable going through it. And Bill didn't really like Percy, so it was hard to kind of pony him through because Bill wanted to bite him. And you'll notice his pinned ears in a lot of these clips because he thinks Percy sucks. But anyways, I tried to keep Bill in the water so that Percy could walk towards Bill and get some confidence from Bill. But it made things a little more difficult since Bill was kind of being mean to Percy. But anyways, he started to get brave and more okay with the water as time went on. And I think it was a really good experience for him because these are things he's going to encounter as a riding horse. Anyways, for his first ride off the track and first hack ever, Percy was amazing, especially with the cows. He surprised me because a lot of the horses I get off the track have complete meltdowns over animals like cows, goats, and chickens because a lot of them have not seen them before. But he handled it really bravely, and after he had a good look at certain spooky things, he got over it quite quickly and was just an all-star and a very good boy. So going forward, we're going to do these same walking hacks through the back with a friend and get him used to going out quite often for hacks. Like, we're probably going to ride him 3 to 4 times a week, but they'll be light rides and just walking and hacking in the back. And then once he's comfortable going out with another horse, we will start to try to hack him out alone so he can get braver on his own. And then from there, we will start to work towards getting him going under saddle in an arena as the weather starts to get better. But for the next little while, it's just going to be hacking and walking and lots of patient stuff to kind of just build his trust and get him used to things and realizing that his job is just going to be quiet for a very long time. Also, I'm aware that everyone does things differently and not everyone gives horses letdown time, and some people start riding them right off the track or putting them into ring work really fast off the track or jumping them quickly off the track. And one thing I will say is that going slow is never going to mess up what you do with your horse, but going too fast can set them back for a very long time. So allowing them time to settle in off the track and enjoy turnout and rest is never really going to impede your ability to get them going as a show horse. And taking your time to build the foundation on the flat and under saddle before ever jumping and adding in more complex things, that will never hurt you. But rushing too quickly can fry a brain or injure a horse. So that's just something to consider, which is why I choose to go slow. And this is just kind of what I believe in. And as I go through this series, starting Percy back, you will get a good idea of how I start my horses back and why it contributes to their quiet mindsets and just how rideable they tend to be as they move forward in training.